bar.
Thank you, sir. Mr. German, before the lunch adjournment, we were speaking about documents which really named you. Now that we've had what I hope was a good lunch, we can go to Skegness. And I would like to show you two SDS reports about the SWP Skegness rallies. These were an annual event, weren't they, held at Easter?
That's right, yeah.
Can we look first of all at a document from 1980, Volume 2, Tab 15, UCPI 5014551. Now this is the cover page of the report, which is dated the 25th of September 1980, referring to the Easter 1980 rally. At paragraph 3, it says, submitted with this report is a list received from a reliable source of those persons who registered for the rally and took up residence at the holiday centre for the weekend. Thereafter, there is a very long list running to about 50 pages of attendees. If we go over one page to page 2, please, we see an example of what I would call an ordinary page, which has names, district, and then references. But I'd also like to go to page 49, please. And here towards the end, we have a page where you've got names down the side on the left, but then under the heading district, only some of the names have a district by them. And a lot of the entries seem in fact to describe instead what the person did. And there are a number of entries which say entertainer and a number which say individual. Was this an event that you could attend if you were not a member of the SWP?
Yes, that's right, you could.
And if we look at the first time individual appears, the highest entry, we see under reference it says no trace. Is it possible that somebody attended the Skegness rally in Easter 1980 who was not a member of the Socialist Workers' Party and had never come to the attention of Special Branch before?
Yes, that's quite possible.
And the entertainers, were they members of the SWP or did it vary?
Not necessarily. There'd be musicians or comedians and things like that.
Thank you. That can be taken down. Can we go to 1982, please? That's Volume 2, Tab 27. And the number for that is UCPI 5018180. And this is dated the 14th of May 1982. And paragraph 1 reads, submitted herewith is a list obtained from a secret and reliable source of all adults from the London area who attended the Socialist Workers' Party annual rally, which was held at Skegness from the 9th to the 12th of April. And then there are pages of names and also documents that were emanating from that event. Were the attendance lists for both those events confidential?
Yes.
Can we now move from Skegness to the 1980 National Delegate Conference? That's Volume 2, Tab 16, UCPI 5016148. This is dated the 13th of January 1981. It's a report on the National Delegate Conference of that year. It's a very long report, but I can take you straight to the bottom of the present screen for the question I want to ask you. There are listed there's a guide to what documents are attached to the report. The first one, documents 1 to 10, additional information sheets concerning confidential statistics on party membership, activities and publications. So, they were indeed confidential, weren't they?
They weren't of individual names. They will have been of how many people had joined, how many people had left, and so on. So yeah, they wouldn't have been in breach of individual people's names.
But these are statistics. These are...
Yes, there'll be how many papers were sold and so on.
Yes, yeah. I'm moving from the names that we saw in Skegness to... This is more about information about the party, confidential party information. These are internal statistics about the state of your party, aren't they?
That's right.
And those are confidential. A mixture of party and personal affairs. If we go to tab 17, UCPI 5016582. This is a document dated the 3rd of April 1981. Reads, submitted herewith is an up-to-date list of the Secretariat and their telephone numbers of the SWP National Office. The list was circulated with the SWP Weekly Information Sheet dated the 31st of March 1981. And then there's a list of names and details. Are these the people that Phil Cooper would have been working with?
Well, some of them, yes, he would have been.
Again, confidential?
Well, yes, they should have been confidential. That shouldn't have been available, the phone numbers or any other details about them.
Finally, Volume 2, Tab 20, UCPI 5016619. This is the 30th of September 1981. Reads paragraph 2, the persons listed in the appendix are shown in the records of the Socialist Workers' Party at their national office. Gives the address as holding the positions in the SWP as shown. Then there's a very long list of different people in different positions. Would it be right to say that some of these positions will have been a matter of public knowledge and some of them would not?
Yes, it's probably a combination of both.
But the records, your records were themselves confidential?
Yes.
Having put to you a series of documents containing large numbers of data, some of it personal, some of it not, what is your reaction to that reporting on your organisation, its members and those associated with it?
Well, I think, let's just take Skegness first. I mean, Skegness was a weekend which was meant as a kind of combination of social holiday and political event. It attracted a lot of people who weren't SWP members, including people's partners, and obviously lots of children came and people who just wanted that mixture of things. And therefore a lot of those names that have been passed over will have been of people who weren't SWP, and as you said, may well not have been on any list or under any scrutiny from anybody. So I think that is a breach of their details. It's also, it really misunderstands the whole kind of event. This was an event which we were open about, which people came to. Some people didn't go to any meetings. Maybe they just went there because they just wanted to have a good time and their partners were going to meetings. There was absolutely no justification for what was done. In terms of the party conference, again, most of these pieces of information didn't need to be given to anybody. As I've repeated on a number of occasions, people were engaged in activity which was perfectly above board and perfectly acceptable to anybody to be doing. And I find it quite amazing that these are, so many of these names have been handed over. And where would that have ended? It would end with them being blacklisted, not being able to get jobs, and suffering detriment in all sorts of ways to their lives.
Standing back now, you, I think, are well aware of the evidence that's been given in the earlier phases about infiltration of the SWP and the fact there were a large number of undercover police officers who did infiltrate the SWP in the Tranche era. We've seen that there was infiltration at branch level, district level, and to some extent at national level for most of the Tranche 1 era. Could I ask for your reflections, please, on the scale and duration of infiltration into your party?
Well, I think it, as I've said, I don't think it was justified. I don't see why any of this information needed to be passed on. And the only conclusion that you can draw from people infiltrating, whether it's at national level or indeed at branch or district level, is that they were looking to find things that simply they wanted to put the left in a very bad light. That's the conclusion I draw. And I feel that there's a very great difference between the infiltration of the SWP and any surveillance of the National Front, for example, which there simply wasn't. And that was clearly a decision that was taken. So you have to see this, I think, as politically motivated. And I think you have to see it as trying to put the left in the light that they're to blame. And the whole sort of, if you read many of the reports, the whole tenet of them is that the SWP was piggybacking on things, was using organisations, all this sort of thing. And no evidence is really given to prove that. So I would say that there was a big effort put into this for very, very little results in terms of any information that was found, because most of that information could have been very clearly found in complete legitimate ways, which would have saved this infiltration and would have saved a great deal of public time and money.
Thank you. Those are all my questions up to this stage. There may be some more in a moment.
What our process requires is that there is a pause of 20 minutes while anybody who is a participant in the inquiry can suggest questions or lines of questioning to Mr. Barr, which he may then ask you when 20 minutes have gone. And then your counsel will have the opportunity of asking you any questions in what old-fashioned lawyers call re-examination. 20-minute break, please.
So no further questions.
Mr. Scobie.
Yes. Now, Mr. Chairman, not many more questions, but just a few topics. And I just wanted to start, if I may, with the issue of opposing National Front marches. I mean, was there a policy of stewarding and discipline in relation to the SWP about approaching those marches?
Yes, of course. We had a very extensive stewarding operation. We always made sure what we wanted to do was to make sure that people could get to the marches safely, could operate in a disciplined, collective manner, and not to have it descending into just fights between individuals. So yes, we put a lot of effort into that.
And I mean, one of the words you've used was obstruction. And can you just define what you mean by obstructing the marches? What were you meaning by that?
What I think was usually what we intended to do was to say we didn't want the march to go on a particular route, and that therefore we would block the road, we would sit down in the road as we've done on occasions, or we would try in different ways to prevent it happening. So that's really what we were talking about. We were talking about blocking, obstructing, whatever word you want to put, that kind of thing.
So preventing the marchers, the NF marchers, from getting into the areas where there would be trouble.
That's right, because we didn't want to. This wasn't seen as us versus the National Front in that sense. Obviously, we didn't agree at all with their politics. We thought they were a real danger. But what we were concerned about was we were operating in a period with very, very high levels of attacks, with deaths, more than 50 deaths in those few years of murders of black and ethnic minority people. So what we wanted to do was to stop them being able to do it. And I think what I felt very strongly, and I still do feel very strongly, is that if you look at the approach of Hitler's Nazis before 1933, the control of the streets was incredibly important to them. And we didn't want the NF to be able to do that in this country. We knew they were getting very big votes in elections, and particularly in London in 1977, but we wanted to say we don't want this translated into activity on the ground, which can be actively harmful to so many people, including some of our own members who suffered attacks.
Just this, there have been a number of specific allegations of, allegations of so-called hotheads that were linked allegedly to the SWP. What did you do with people who fell within that bracket? I mean, were people like that actually expelled?
There were some people who were expelled in the late 1970s, or we parted company with one way or the other, because we put a very strong argument that this isn't about just individuals chasing after National Front. And that had been a problem generally, because certainly in the area I lived in South Hackney, there were quite strong fascist groupings. That was true in South Hackney, in Shoreditch, Hoxton, Roman Road, in Tower Hamlets and various other places. And it could easily become, you had these old Mosleyite families dating back to the 30s. It could easily become just an individual fight between people. And we were very much against that, because we could see where it could lead. It could just lead to forms of gang warfare, which wouldn't benefit anybody. So that was very much against our policy, and we did break with those people where we felt we had to.
And we've heard of the disorder at Southall or at Lewisham, Red Lion Square, obviously. Looking back on it, what, in your view, could have been done to prevent that disorder, or those examples of disorder? What, looking back on those events, could have been done to prevent this disorder?
The main thing that could have been done would have been a recognition by the police in particular, and by the higher authorities, because there's no doubt there was a policy here going on, that a recognition that it wasn't acceptable to just say to these people, not only can you march, we are going to protect your marches. And particularly, if you look in Southall, the whole of the community was against this. I mean, they've since, there's a school named after Blair Peach, a primary school in Southall, because the community recognised the sacrifice that he'd made. But nobody wanted them there, is the honest truth. Nobody in Southall, apart from a tiny handful, would think it was a good idea.
So, in short, prevented by what?
Well, but the police didn't need to have this policy. They didn't need to do this, and they went out of their way to do it.
So what, banning the march?
Well, banning a march is one option,
Yep.
and that was done. Interestingly, in 1981, the Metropolitan Police did ban all the National Front marches, but we also took the view that bans themselves don't necessarily end the situation, and that therefore we need to have a situation where the community and the left and the people who are anti-fascist do need to be able to say, we are not going to put up with these people in our area.
Just, we know this morning a lot of questions were asked of you about the physical side of opposition, effectively. What, in real summary form, please, very short form, were the political campaigns you were engaged in? And in essence, what was their purpose?
We did lots of support for the black and Asian communities. Just to give one example,
Yep.
in Brick Lane, the National Front in 1978 went and smashed a load of windows in Brick Lane of the Asian shops and restaurants. We took a decision that we would occupy the space at the top of Brick Lane where the National Front had their paper sale. And we did that with the Bengali community for several weeks. And that was what I thought was a very important part of what we did. It was saying to people who are under threat, we're willing to join in with you in defending your community against people. So those kind of things. We painted out slogans. I painted out slogans on my own block of flats when I moved in there, where the NF put slogans on. We were determined not to have them.
Yeah, graffiti, that's
right, yeah. Yeah.
So that sort of thing.
That's right. And that was most of what people did against the fascists. I mean, we're hearing all this now about several very high-level confrontations, but most of it was, how do we combat racism? How do we organise in schools and in factories and all these places against the National Front?
Just moving away and dealing with a specific area you were asked about this morning, Grumwick, and people being bussed in. And you were asked a specific question. I want to just go back to it. You were asked this: however strongly the strikers and members of your organisation felt about their actions, strike breaking was not unlawful, was it? And your answer was, your reply was, I don't know whether it was unlawful to do what they did. Just pausing for a moment. I mean, as a matter of fact, did you know, one way or the other, what the Labour law was at that time?
No, I didn't.
I mean, did you know, one way or the other, if it was legal to sack strikers and bust in a new workforce? Did you know?
I didn't know, but it shouldn't be legal, in my opinion, even if it was.
So when you said you don't know whether it was unlawful to do what they did, is that what you were getting at?
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Just finally this, one of the words used on a number of occasions this morning was the word overthrow. And just this, how did you think the socialist transformation of society would come about? How did you believe it was going to come about?
I believe it, and I still believe it can only come about by people taking action into their own hands to try to achieve a more democratic society. Now, that means all sorts of things. It might mean strikes, it might mean demonstrations, it might mean a whole range of different things, but it's mass activity on behalf of the masses, and I don't see any alternative to that. And it's always tried to be put, and I know with a whole number of the reports are trying to put it as, it's like a putsch. You know, there's a tiny number of us who, you know, turn up and think that we're going to get rid of the MPs or whatever it is. That is so far from any socialist activity in this country. It's just not true.
So did you and do you view it as an evolving process?
It's a process. It's a process where if you think about when any revolution or any major upheaval occurs, it's a process of decomposition at the top of society. It's a process of people becoming more aware at the bottom of society, and it's a process of them winning larger numbers of people to take action in order to change the society. That's how I would sum it up.
Nearly there. Last question, really revolving around that process. This is not just your own personal belief, but also the belief of as you saw it from the SWP. As part of that process that you've just described, and that evolving process, did it inherently necessarily involve violence?
I've always taken the view that revolutions aren't violent, or not mainly violent occurrences. They are occurrences which take place when people can no longer live in the old way and the rulers can no longer rule in the old way. That's when they come about, and they involve a big democratic movement which isn't about violence. And when you look at, when people talk about violent, you know, the situation with, say, the French Revolution, you're looking at what happens after the failure of that revolutionary process, in my opinion.
Yes. So we have no further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have two fairly specific and minor questions. First, in the papers I've seen reference to, quote, squadists, close quote, are as the people within the SWP who were advocating individual violence. Am I right in thinking that that's a term that you recognise, and that those are the people who were required to leave?
Yes, that's
Yep.
right. That's right.
So when I see a reference to squadists, it's
That's
that
what it
group.
means, yeah.
Fine. Finally, this, and please tell me if you don't know one way or the other, but my understanding of the law is that the 1948 Representation of the People Act, which I think applied at the time of the Southall disturbances, and indeed your own event at the school before you became an SWP member, that those standing in parliamentary and local elections in London boroughs were entitled to use places that were wholly or mainly maintained at public expense for their election meetings. Is that something that you or the SWP were aware of at the time?
I was aware of it, and
Yeah.
we objected to that policy, and that's what the Haggerston School thing was about. I thought it was a terrible policy, and it was one that has been reversed quite some time ago. You'd obviously know when it was better than I do, but it's no longer the case. And I think that's an interesting thing in terms of how people's views of these things have changed. I don't think anybody would argue, or nearly anybody would argue, that it's a good idea for fascists to meet in school halls or council buildings. So that was, we did object to that, yes.
I entirely accept that you objected to it, but you objected to it knowing that the law of the land actually provided that they were entitled to make use of
Well,
those
I
places.
found out about it at the
Yeah.
Haggerston School
Yeah.
one, yes. I didn't,
Yes.
it wasn't something I knew much before about
Yeah.
that then.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the evidence you've given. I hope you found it an interesting experience. I personally am very grateful to you for coming and telling us all those years later about what was going on from a senior level in the SWP at the time. May I take it that I can expect the same from you when we get to our next tranche, Tranche 2? And
I hope so.
well, of course, health and intellect permitting, of course, that goes for both of us. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
I think that concludes today's proceedings, does it not? Very well.